Hello and welcome to History at Night. Picture yourself standing on a wooden dock in Port Royal, Jamaica, in the year 1715. The air is thick with salt spray and the scent of tar. Around you, the harbour bustles with activity as merchants haggle over cargo and sailors prepare for voyages to distant shores. But there, anchored just beyond the merchant vessels, sits a different kind of ship entirely. Her black hull gleams in the Caribbean sun, and from her mainmast flies a flag that sends a chill through every honest sailor's heart. This is a pirate ship, and tonight we will step aboard her decks to discover what life was truly like for the men who chose to live beyond the reach of any king's law. Most of us imagine pirates as swashbuckling heroes from adventure novels, complete with treasure maps and dramatic sword fights on moonlit beaches. But the reality was far more complex and infinitely more fascinating. These were not romantic figures living lives of constant adventure. They were desperate men who had chosen a brutal existence at the very margins of civilization. Tonight, we will leave behind the myths and legends to explore the authentic world of the pirate ship. We will discover how these floating communities governed themselves, how they survived the endless weeks at sea, and why so many ordinary sailors willingly traded their lives of legal servitude for the dangerous freedom of the Black Flag. But before we climb aboard, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps support our journey into the forgotten corners of history, and it means the world to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world you're listening tonight, so please share your location in the comments below. And now, settle in and let the sounds of the modern world fade away. Our ship awaits, and the tide is turning. Let us sail back 3 centuries to a time when the Caribbean seas were ruled by men who answered to no authority but their own. The first thing that strikes you as you step aboard a pirate vessel is the overwhelming assault on your senses. The deck beneath your feet is rough and weathered, worn smooth in places by the constant passage of bare feet. The wood creaks and groans with every gentle roll of the ship, a symphony of timber and rope that becomes the soundtrack to your new life. The smell is immediate and inescapable. Salt permeates everything, mixed with the sharp tang of tar used to waterproof the rigging. Beneath that lies something earthier and less pleasant, the accumulated scent of dozens of men living in close quarters for months at a time. Above you, a forest of masts and rigging stretches toward the sky. The complexity is staggering. Thick ropes called shrouds support the masts, while thinner lines control the position of the massive canvas sails. Every rope has a purpose, and a skilled sailor must know them all by touch, even in the darkness of a storm. The sails themselves, when unfurled, are monuments to human ingenuity. These great sheets of canvas, some as large as a house, are what drive the ship across the trackless ocean, using nothing but the power of the wind. The deck is divided into distinct areas, each with its own function. At the front of the ship, the bow, you find the forecastle, or forecastle as the sailors call it. This raised platform houses some of the crew's quarters and provides an elevated position for lookouts to scan the horizon for potential prey or danger. Moving toward the back of the ship, the stern, you encounter the main deck where most of the ship's daily activities take place. Here, massive cannons peek through square openings called gun ports, their black iron barrels ready to deliver devastating broadsides to enemy vessels. At the very back of the ship rises the quarterdeck, an elevated platform that serves as the command center. This is where the ship's officers stand during battle, where the great wheel that steers the vessel is located, and where important ceremonies and meetings take place. Below the quarterdeck lies the captain's cabin, a relatively luxurious space by the standards of the ship, though still cramped and basic by any land-based measure. But it is when you descend below deck that you truly begin to understand the reality of life aboard a pirate ship. The main deck, for all its openness to the sky, is spacious compared to the world below. As you climb down the ladder into the ship's belly, the ceiling drops dramatically. Most men must duck their heads to avoid the heavy wooden beams that support the deck above. The air grows thick and stale, heavy with moisture and the accumulated breath of sleeping men. This is where the majority of the crew lives, works, and sleeps. The space is cramped beyond modern comprehension. Rows of hammocks hang from the overhead beams, suspended so close together that a man can easily reach out and touch his neighbours on either side. There are no private spaces, no walls, no doors. Privacy is a luxury that simply does not exist in this floating world. Every conversation can be overheard, every personal habit observed, every moment of weakness witnessed by dozens of eyes. The hammocks themselves are ingenious inventions, originally adopted from the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean. Unlike fixed bunks, these suspended beds sway with the motion of the ship, preventing their occupants from being thrown about during rough seas. Each man's hammock is his only private space, a small cocoon of canvas that serves as bedroom, storage locker, and refuge all in one. When not in use, the hammocks are rolled up and stowed away, transforming the sleeping quarters into a communal workspace where men can gather to eat, play cards, or repair their equipment. The ship's hold, located in the very bottom of the vessel, serves multiple crucial functions. Here, massive barrels of drinking water are secured against the ship's constant motion. Fresh water is perhaps the most precious commodity aboard any vessel, more valuable than gold when you are weeks from the nearest port. Alongside the water barrels stand containers of salted meat, dried biscuits called hardtack, and other preserved foods that form the backbone of the crew's diet. But the hold also serves a darker purpose. This is where the ship's arsenal is stored. Barrels of black gunpowder are carefully positioned away from any source of heat or spark. Cannonballs are stacked in neat pyramids, secured with rope netting to prevent them from becoming deadly projectiles if the ship rolls violently. Spare weapons, tools, and equipment fill every available space, all lashed down to prevent damage during storms. The very bottom of the hold, called the bilge, is perhaps the most unpleasant part of the entire ship. Here, all the water that inevitably seeps through the ship's wooden hull collects in a foul-smelling pool. This stagnant water mixes with spilled food, waste, and other refuse to create a nauseating soup that must be regularly pumped out by the crew. The smell from the bilge permeates the entire ship, a constant reminder of the less glamorous realities of life at sea. What makes this cramped and uncomfortable world even more remarkable is how these men manage to govern themselves without descending into chaos. Pirates, despite their reputation as lawless criminals, actually lived under some of the most democratic and egalitarian systems of their time. Before any voyage began, the entire crew would gather on deck to debate and vote on a set of rules known as the ship's articles. These were not commands handed down from above, but agreements reached by consensus among equals. The articles covered every aspect of life aboard the ship. They established how captured treasure would be divided, with specific shares allocated to different crew members based on their roles and responsibilities. The captain might receive 2 shares, skilled craftsmen, like the ship's carpenter, or surgeon might get 1.5 shares, while ordinary sailors received 1 full share each. This system ensured that every man had a direct financial stake in the success of the voyage. The articles also established rules of conduct that were surprisingly sophisticated. They typically forbade fighting between crew members while aboard the ship, requiring that disputes be settled on shore with pistols or swords to prevent violence from disrupting the ship's operations. They often included provisions for compensating crew members who were injured in battle, creating an early form of disability insurance. A man who lost an eye might receive 100 pieces of 8, while the loss of a limb could be worth several hundred. Most remarkably, the articles usually required that major decisions be made by majority vote of the entire crew. This included choices about which ships to attack, where to sail next, and even whether to remove an unpopular captain from command. In an age when most people lived under absolute monarchies and had no voice in their government, these pirate ships functioned as floating republics, where every man's opinion carried equal weight. The enforcement of these rules fell to an elected official called the quartermaster, who served as a check on the captain's power. While the captain commanded during battle and navigation, the quartermaster represented the crew's interests in daily life. He distributed food and water rations, settled disputes between crew members, and ensured that captured treasure was divided fairly, according to the agreed-upon shares. In many ways, he was more powerful than the captain himself, serving as both judge and protector of the crew's democratic rights. This system of governance was born from the harsh experiences these men had endured in their previous lives. Most pirates had served aboard merchant vessels or naval ships, where they were treated little better than slaves. They had experienced the arbitrary cruelty of tyrannical captains, the theft of their wages, and the brutal discipline of the cat-o'-nine-tails. When they chose the pirate's life, they were determined never again to submit to such treatment. The Democratic Articles were their insurance against tyranny, their guarantee that no single man would ever again hold absolute power over their lives. Tonight, we have begun our exploration of this remarkable world, stepping aboard a vessel where desperate men created their own society according to their own rules. We have seen the physical reality of their floating home and discovered the democratic principles that governed their daily lives. But this is only the beginning of our journey. In the chapters to come, we will delve deeper into the rhythms of pirate life, exploring how these men fed themselves during long months at sea, how they maintained their health without modern medicine, and how they found entertainment in a world bounded by endless water and sky. We have explored the physical structure of their floating world and witnessed the remarkable democratic principles that governed their society. But to truly understand life aboard a pirate ship, we must now turn our attention to the daily rhythms that defined existence in this wooden realm. For these were not men who lived in constant battle and adventure, but sailors who spent most of their time in the grinding routine of maintaining their vessel and surviving the challenges of the open sea. The day begins before dawn with the changing of the watch. The crew is divided into two groups, each taking turns at 4-hour intervals to manage the ship's operations. As the stars begin to fade and the eastern horizon shows the first pale hints of sunrise, the men of the morning watch are roused from their hammocks. There is no gentle awakening here, no luxury of slowly emerging from sleep. A sharp call from the watch officer and the prodding of those already awake brings every man instantly to alertness. The morning air carries a chill that cuts through even the warmest Caribbean night. Men emerge from below deck wrapped in whatever clothing they possess, their breath visible in small puffs of vapor. The deck is wet with dew, making every step treacherous on the smooth wooden planks. But there is no time for comfort or complaint. The ship demands constant attention, and the sea shows no mercy to those who neglect their duties. The first task of each day is to assess the ship's condition after the long night. Men fan out across the deck, checking every rope, every sail, every piece of equipment that might have suffered damage during the hours of darkness. The rigging must be examined for frayed lines that could snap under strain. The sails are inspected for tears that could rob the ship of precious speed. The deck itself is scrutinized for loose planks or damaged fittings that could prove dangerous in rough weather. This morning inspection is far more than simple routine maintenance. In a world where the nearest help might be hundreds of miles away, where a single broken mast could mean death for the entire crew, vigilance becomes a matter of survival. Every man aboard understands that his life depends not only on his own skill and attention, but on the careful work of his shipmates. A rope improperly secured by one sailor could bring down a sail that kills another. A cannon, poorly maintained by the gun crew, could explode and slaughter half the men on deck. As the sun climbs higher, The ship comes fully alive with activity. The deck becomes a workshop where skilled craftsmen practice their vital trades. The ship's carpenter, one of the most valued members of any crew, emerges with his tools to address the constant battle against the sea's attempts to reclaim the vessel. Wood swells and shrinks with changes in humidity and temperature. Joints work loose under the constant stress of wave action. Planks split from the shock of cannon fire or the impact of heavy seas. The carpenter's skilled hands are all that stand between the crew and the crushing embrace of the ocean depths. Near the carpenter works the sailmaker, another artisan whose skills can mean the difference between life and death. Canvas sails are constantly battered by wind and spray, stretched and torn by the tremendous forces required to drive several hundred tons of ship through the water. The sailmaker's needle flashes in the morning light as he repairs tears and reinforces weak spots, his weathered fingers working with a speed and precision that comes only from years of practice. The ship's cook begins his own preparations for the day's meals, though calling him a cook perhaps grants too much dignity to his humble role. More often than not, he is simply another sailor with slightly more skill at managing the ship's small galley fire than his mates. The galley itself is a cramped space dominated by a brick-lined firebox where all the ship's food must be prepared. Cooking at sea presents challenges unknown to any land-based kitchen. The ship's constant motion means that pots and pans must be carefully secured to prevent scalding accidents. The limited supply of fresh water means that most cooking relies on seawater, adding a briny taste to every meal. The breakfast that emerges from this floating kitchen would hardly be recognizable as standards. The A meal by modern foundation is hardtack, biscuits baked from flour, water and salt until virtually they achieve the consistency of wooing survive months in the ship's spoiling butt. These structable crackers cans stores without beer to become edible. Even they require soaking in water or a texture then they retain, and that challenges the strongest teeth bland taste to the palate. The hardtack comes pleasure little. Tack comes, alongside that, off assured in a portion of salted meat, usually beef or pork, that has been krells of bee salt concentration preservation. Tharine for bar required to prevent spoilage makes this meat almost inedibly salty when first removed from the barrel. It must be scraped and soaked to remove the worst of the preservative, leaving behind protein that is tough, chewy, and only marginally palatable. Yet this unappetizing fare represents the difference between life and death for men who may spend months away from any source of fresh provisions. The liquid accompaniment to this meagre breakfast is equally uninspiring. Fresh water, stored in wooden casks, quickly becomes stagnant and foul-tasting in the tropical heat. To make it more palatable and to provide some nutritional value, it is often mixed with rum to create a mixture called grog. This diluted alcohol serves multiple purposes beyond simply making the water drinkable. The alcohol helps kill harmful bacteria that might otherwise cause disease, while the small amount of nutrition in the rum provides some relief from the vitamin deficiencies that plague long sea voyages. As the crew consumes this humble meal, gathering in small groups on deck or below in the cramped quarters, conversation turns to the eternal concerns of sailors everywhere. Weather dominates many discussions, for the wind and sea control every aspect of their existence. Too little wind leaves them becalmed, drifting helplessly while their water supplies dwindle and their food rots in the tropical heat. Too much wind brings the terror of storms that can dismast their ship or drive it onto hidden reefs. The talk also turns to their destination and purpose, for unlike merchant sailors bound for specific ports with predetermined cargoes, pirates must constantly make decisions about where to cruise and what prey to seek. The Caribbean offers numerous possibilities, each with its own advantages and dangers. The shipping lanes between Europe and the Spanish colonies carry vessels loaded with manufactured goods and precious metals. The routes connecting the Sugar Islands to North American ports promise ships heavy with molasses, rum, and other valuable commodities. But with opportunity comes risk, and the crew's conversations inevitably touch on the growing threat of naval patrols and pirate hunters. The golden age of piracy is beginning to face serious challenges as European powers dedicate more resources to protecting their maritime commerce. Royal Navy frigates cruise the sea lanes with orders to capture or kill any pirates they encounter. Colonial governors offer substantial bounties for the heads of notorious captains. Former pirates, accepting royal pardons, sometimes turn their knowledge against their former brothers. These concerns weigh heavily on men who have chosen to live outside the protection of any law. They cannot appeal to any court for justice, cannot seek help from any official authority, cannot retreat to any safe harbour controlled by their own government. They are truly outlaws in the most literal sense, beyond the law's protection as well as beyond its reach. Their only security lies in their ship, their weapons, and their brotherhood with the men who share their dangerous calling. As morning advances toward midday, the ship's routine continues with the countless tasks required to keep a complex wooden machine functioning in one of the world's harshest environments. Men climb high into the rigging to adjust sails as the wind shifts direction or strength. Others work with tar and oakum to seal the gaps between deck planks where water might penetrate. The constant battle against the sea's corrosive effects demands vigilance and hard labour from every member of the crew. The hierarchy aboard the ship becomes more apparent as the day progresses, and various specialised tasks require attention. While the democratic articles ensure that every man has a voice in major decisions, the day-to-day operation of the vessel still requires clear chains of command and specialised expertise. The captain may be elected by his crew, but his knowledge of navigation and seamanship gives him natural authority in matters of sailing and ship handling. Below the captain, a small group of officers handles specific aspects of the ship's operation. The sailing master, if the crew is fortunate enough to have one, manages the complex business of navigation. Using primitive instruments and centuries of accumulated wisdom, he must guide the ship across trackless oceans to find tiny islands or specific shipping routes. His tools are simple by modern standards, consisting mainly of a magnetic compass, a few charts of questionable accuracy, and various devices for measuring the sun's position at noon to determine latitude. The quartermaster, as we have seen, serves as the crew's advocate and the enforcer of their democratic rights. But he also handles many practical aspects of daily life, from distributing rations to organising work parties to settling disputes between crew members. His position requires not only the respect of his shipmates, but also the diplomatic skills to balance competing interests and personalities in the confined space of the ship. The boatswain, or boatswain, manages much of the ship's routine maintenance and the work of the common sailors. He is typically an experienced seaman who has mastered all the complex skills required to handle the ship's rigging, sails, and deck equipment. His sharp whistle and shouted commands coordinate the efforts of dozens of men when quick action is required to trim sails or secure equipment against an approaching storm. Tonight, we have witnessed the morning routine that begins each day in this floating world, seen how these men sustain themselves on the most basic provisions, and observed the careful hierarchy that balances democratic principles with practical necessity. But the day is far from over, and many challenges await our pirates as the sun climbs higher in the tropical sky. The midday sun beats down mercilessly on the wooden deck, turning every piece of metal too hot to touch, and baking the tar in the ship's seams until it becomes soft and pungent. This is when the true test of seamanship reveals itself. For managing a complex sailing vessel in the blazing heat of the Caribbean requires both physical endurance and mental alertness that lesser men simply cannot maintain. The lookouts perched high in the crow's nest face perhaps the greatest challenge of all. Stationed on small platforms near the tops of the masts, they must endure hours of exposure to the sun's punishing rays while maintaining constant vigilance for any sign of other vessels on the horizon. The view from their lofty perch is spectacular but demanding. In every direction stretches an endless expanse of blue water, broken only by the occasional white cap or the distant silhouette of a cloud. Their eyes must be trained to detect the faintest irregularity, the smallest deviation from the natural patterns of sea and sky that might indicate a sail in the distance. These men are the ship's early warning system, the guardians whose sharp eyes could mean the difference between a successful hunt and a deadly trap. A merchant vessel spotted early gives the pirates time to plan their approach, to position themselves advantageously, and to prepare their weapons and tactics. But a naval warship discovered too late could spell doom for the entire crew, leaving them no time to escape before powerful guns their reduce vessel to floating wreckage. The physical demands on the lookouts are extraordinary. The platform on which they stand is barely large enough for one man, and it sways dramatically with every movement of the ship. In rough weather, they might find themselves describing great arcs through the air, sometimes nearly horizontal as the vessel rolls in heavy seas. The wooden mast to which they cling becomes a line, their lift-only thing preventing a fatal plunge to the deck far below or into the churning waters alongside the ship. Meanwhile, on deck, other crew members attend to the endless maintenance tasks that keep their floating home seaworthy. The tropical sun that torments the lookouts also serves a vital purpose in the ship's daily routine. Wet clothing, blankets, and hammocks are spread across every available surface to dry in the blazing heat. The dampness that pervades every corner of the ship below deck breeds mold, rot, and disease, if not regularly driven out by the sun's purifying rays. The crew takes advantage of these sunny intervals to air out their personal possessions as well. Each man owns little beyond the clothes on his back, perhaps a spare shirt or pair of breeches, and whatever small personal items he has managed to accumulate during his time at sea. A lucky sailor might possess a few silver coins from previous captures, carefully hoarded against future need. Others treasure simple items that remind them of their former lives, a letter from a distant family member, a small religious medallion, or a piece of carved bone that serves as both tool and keepsake. The ship's armament also requires constant attention during these daylight hours. The cannons that line the vessel's sides are more than mere weapons. They are complex mechanical devices that demand skilled maintenance to function properly. Each gun weighs several tons and is mounted on a heavy wooden carriage that allows it to be pulled back from the gun port for loading and cleaning. The process of maintaining these weapons is both labor-intensive and dangerous. The gun crews work in carefully coordinated teams, each man responsible for specific aspects of the cannon's care and operation. The metal barrels must be cleaned regularly to remove the corrosive residue left by black powder. This requires ramming long brushes down the bore of each gun, scraping away the accumulated deposits that could cause the weapon to misfire or even explode. The wooden carriages need constant inspection and repair, for the tremendous shock of firing can split planks or loosen joints that must be quickly addressed to prevent the gun from becoming useless. Perhaps most critically, the gunpowder itself demands meticulous care. Stored in the ship's hold in heavy wooden barrels, this explosive substance is the source of the vessel's offensive power. But it is also a constant threat to every man aboard. Black powder of this era is notoriously unstable, sensitive to heat, moisture, and shock. A single spark in the wrong place could trigger an explosion that would instantly vaporize the entire ship and everyone on it. The powder magazine, where the gunpowder is stored, is treated with an almost religious reverence by the crew. Access is strictly controlled, and only the most trusted men are allowed to enter this sacred space. When powder is removed for use, it is transported in small quantities using specially designed containers that minimize the risk of accidental ignition. Even the clothing worn by men working with gunpowder is carefully inspected to ensure that no metal buttons or buckles could create a spark. The loading and preparation of ammunition is another complex task that occupies much of the crew's time during peaceful intervals. Iron cannonballs must be carefully inspected for cracks or flaws that could cause them to break apart when fired. Chain shot, consisting of two smaller balls connected by a length of chain, requires particular attention to ensure that the connecting links are sound and the balls properly balanced. Grape shot, designed to sweep enemy decks clear of personnel, must be carefully packed to ensure that the small iron balls will spread properly when the weapon is discharged. As the afternoon progresses, the ship's rhythm continues with the preparation of the evening meal. The cook faces the same challenges that confronted him at breakfast, but now he must work in the accumulated heat of the day. The galley fire, essential for preparing any hot food, turns the already cramped cooking space into a furnace that tests human endurance to its limits. Sweat pours from his body as he tends the carefully controlled flames, adding precious fuel only when absolutely necessary. The evening meal offers little more variety than its morning counterpart, but the cook may occasionally supplement the basic rations with whatever additional provisions the ship has managed to acquire. If they are fortunate enough to be near land, fresh fish caught by enterprising crew members might grace the table. Flying fish, drawn to the ship's lights at night, sometimes land on deck and provide a welcome change from the monotonous preserved foods. When operating in the Caribbean, the crew might also benefit from occasional fresh fruit obtained during raids on coastal settlements or trades with friendly inhabitants of remote islands. Limes, oranges, and other citrus fruits are particularly prized, not only for their taste, but for their mysterious ability to prevent and cure the dreaded scurvy that claims so many sailors' lives. The ship's officers, if they possess any medical knowledge at all, encourage the consumption of these fruits whenever they become available. Water remains the most critical concern of every meal and indeed every moment of life at sea. The wooden casks that store the ship's water supply are constantly monitored for signs of spoilage or contamination. Even under the best conditions, water stored for weeks in tropical heat develops an unpleasant taste and odor. Worse, it can become breeding ground for harmful organisms that cause severe illness among the crew. The daily water ration is distributed with almost ceremonial care by the quartermaster, who ensures that every man receives his fair share according to the ship's articles. This precious liquid is measured out in small portions, barely enough to sustain life under the punishing conditions of tropical sailing. Men learn to savor every drop, using it not only for drinking, but for the minimal washing that hygiene and health require. Personal cleanliness aboard a pirate ship is a constant challenge that most men eventually abandon as hopeless. Fresh water is too precious to waste on bathing, and seawater, while abundant, leaves skin sticky with salt and clothes stiff and uncomfortable. Most sailors simply accept that they will remain dirty for the duration of their voyage, their bodies accumulating layers of salt, sweat, and grime that become as much a part of them as their weather-beaten clothing. The lack of proper sanitation creates conditions that would horrify modern sensibilities, but were simply accepted as unavoidable facts of sea life. The ship's head, the crude toilet facility located at the bow of the vessel, consists of little more than a wooden seat positioned over the ocean. Waste falls directly into the sea, but the facility offers no privacy and minimal comfort. In rough weather, using the head becomes a dangerous adventure that requires careful timing and a strong grip to avoid being washed overboard. These primitive sanitary conditions contribute to the rapid spread of disease when illness strikes the crew. In the close quarters below deck, where men sleep inches apart and share the same stagnant air, a single sick individual can quickly infect dozens of his shipmates. Dysentery, typhus, and various fevers spread through pirate crews with terrifying speed, sometimes killing more men than any battle or storm. The ship's medicine chest, if one exists at all, contains remedies that are often more dangerous than the ailments they purport to treat. Mercury, commonly prescribed for various conditions, slowly poisons those who consume it. Laudanum, an opium-based painkiller, provides temporary relief, but creates addiction and dependency. Most medical treatment aboard pirate ships relies on folk remedies, superstition, and the body's own ability to heal itself. When serious injury does occur, usually during battle or while working the dangerous rigging, the crew must rely on whatever surgical skills exist among their number. The ship's carpenter, as we have noted, often serves as surgeon due to his familiarity with saws and other cutting tools. Amputation is frequently the only option for severely damaged limbs, performed without anesthesia beyond whatever alcohol might be available to dull the patient's pain. The afternoon watch brings its own particular challenges and rhythms. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, the quality of light on the water changes dramatically. The harsh glare of midday gives way to longer shadows and more subtle variations in color and texture across the ocean's surface. This changing light can make it easier to spot distant sails, but it can also create optical illusions that confuse even experienced lookouts. The wind patterns often shift during these afternoon hours as well, requiring constant adjustment of the ship's sails to maintain optimal speed and course. The crew works in coordinated teams to trim the yards, the horizontal spars that support the sails, adjusting their angle to catch the changing breeze most effectively. This work requires men to climb high into the rigging, often while the ship rolls and pitches in following seas. These afternoon sailing operations demonstrate the remarkable skill and courage of ordinary seamen who make their living from the sea. To watch a crew of pirates working aloft is to witness a ballet of coordinated movement and timing that few landsmen could ever master. Men move along the yards with cat-like agility, their bare feet finding purchase on foot ropes while their hands work to furl or unfurl hundreds of yards of heavy canvas. The risks involved in this work are enormous and ever-present. A single misstep, a moment of inattention, or a sudden gust of wind can send a man plummeting to the deck or into the sea. Those who fall to the deck rarely survive the impact, while those who fall overboard face an equally grim fate. In the time required to bring the ship around and attempt a rescue, a man in the water will likely have drowned or been carried away by the current beyond any hope of recovery. Yet despite these dangers, the crew approaches their work with a professional competence that speaks to their skill and experience. These are not desperate landlubbers playing at being sailors, but experienced seamen who have chosen the pirate's life after years of service aboard legitimate vessels. Their knowledge of seamanship, navigation, and ship handling is often superior to that found aboard many merchant or even naval vessels. As evening approaches and the sun begins to paint the western sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, the ship's routine shifts once again. The day watch prepares to hand over responsibility to their relief, but not before completing the essential tasks that ensure the vessel's safety through the night hours ahead. Equipment must be secured against the possibility of sudden weather changes. Navigation instruments must be cleaned and stowed in their proper places. The ship's position must be calculated and recorded for the benefit of those who will guide her through the darkness. The changing of the watch is a ritual that occurs 4 times each day, marking the passage of time in a world where the sun and stars provide the only reliable chronometers. As the day watch gathers their personal belongings and prepares to descend below deck for food and rest, the night watch emerges to take up the responsibilities of sailing and guarding their floating home. But the transition from day to night brings more than just a change of personnel. It transforms the entire character of life aboard the ship, replacing the harsh clarity of tropical sunlight with the mysterious shadows and sounds of darkness on the open ocean. The night watch faces challenges unknown to their daylight counterparts, navigating by starlight and maintaining vigilance when every shadow might conceal a threat or opportunity. The transformation that occurs as darkness falls over a pirate ship is profound and immediate. The harsh, unforgiving light of the Caribbean sun gives way to a softer, more mysterious world where shadows dance across the deck and every sound takes on new significance. The night watch inherits a vessel that seems almost alive in the darkness, creaking and sighing as the wood responds to the cooling air and the endless motion of the sea. The men who take up their positions for the night shift are often the most experienced sailors aboard, chosen not only for their skill, but for their to remain alert during the long, monotonous hours when fatigue can prove deadly. Their eyes must adjust to the pale starlight that provides the only illumination beyond the occasional lantern hung at critical points around the ship. These lanterns are used sparingly, for light can be seen from great distances across the water, potentially revealing the ship's position to enemies or prey. Navigation during the night hours requires skills that few landsmen ever master. The sailing master, if he is fortunate enough to possess the knowledge, uses the stars as his guide across the trackless ocean. The North Star provides a fixed point of reference, while other constellations wheel slowly across the sky, marking the passage of time and indicating the ship's general direction of travel. But reading the stars requires not only knowledge, but also clear skies. And tropical weather can obscure the heavens for days at a time. When clouds block the stars, the night watch must rely on more primitive methods of navigation. The direction of the wind, the pattern of the waves, even the flight of seabirds can provide clues about the ship's position and course. Experienced sailors develop an almost supernatural ability to sense their vessel's movement through the water, feeling subtle changes in the ship's motion that indicate shifts in wind direction or the presence of land still far below the horizon. The sounds of the night sea create a symphony that becomes as familiar to these men as their own heartbeats. The constant rush of water along the hull mingles with the creaking of timbers and the rhythmic flapping of loose canvas in the rigging. But within this familiar chorus, the trained ear can detect subtle variations that might signal danger or opportunity. The distant splash of a whale breaking the surface, the cry of a seabird that should not be present so far from land, or the barely audible sound of another vessel's passage through the water, all carry meaning for those who know how to listen. The night watch must also maintain the ship's security, for darkness provides cover not only for their own vessel, but for potential threats as well. Enemy ships might attempt to approach under cover of darkness, hoping to achieve surprise in an attack at dawn. Pirates themselves often use this tactic, positioning their vessel near busy shipping lanes during the night so they could strike at first light when their prey vulnerable was most. Maintaining watch during these dark hours requires a rotation system that ensures fresh eyes are always scanning the horizon while allowing others to rest. Men take turns at the most critical observation points, spending an hour or two in intense concentration before being relieved by a shipmate. The crow's nest, so punishing during the heat of the day, becomes almost pleasant in the cool night air, though the constant swaying motion can induce a hypnotic state that threatens alertness. Below deck, the off-duty crew settles into their hammocks for what sleep they can manage in the cramped, airless quarters. The sounds of the night sea penetrate even into these lower regions of the ship, and many men find the constant noise actually helps them sleep, providing a steady backdrop that masks the snoring, coughing, and restless movements of their shipmates. Sleep aboard a pirate vessel is rarely deep or truly restful, as the body must constantly adjust to the ship's motion, and the mind remains alert to any change in the familiar patterns of sound and movement. The darkness also provides cover for more private activities that the harsh scrutiny of daylight makes difficult. Men who have quarrels to settle might choose these quiet hours for whispered negotiations or threats. Others use the relative privacy to tend to personal needs or to work on small projects, perhaps carving a piece of bone into a useful tool or mending a torn shirt by the faint light of a carefully shielded candle. Gambling, always popular among sailors, takes on a different character in the darkness. Card games become exercises in memory and psychology as much as luck, since the dim light makes it difficult to read the cards clearly. Dice games rely more heavily on sound, with players listening intently to the rattle and roll of the bone cubes across the wooden deck. These nighttime games often involve higher stakes and more intense emotions, as the darkness seems to strip away some of the social restraints that govern behavior during the day. The ship's officers face their own unique challenges during the night hours. The captain must trust his vessel to subordinates while he attempts to get what rest he can in his small cabin. His sleep is often fitful, as he remains alert to any change in the ship's motion or any call from the watch that might indicate the need for his immediate attention. The quartermaster continues his rounds even in darkness, checking on the men at their posts and ensuring that discipline is maintained despite the relaxed atmosphere that night often brings. Food preparation during the night hours is limited by the restrictions on open flames. The galley fire is carefully banked to preserve coals for the morning meal, but hot food becomes almost impossible to prepare safely in the darkness. The night watch sustains itself on cold rations, sharing out portions of hardtack soaked in beer or rum, along with whatever preserved meat might be available. These cold meals, eaten in the darkness while standing watch, become communion experiences that bond the crew together in their shared hardships. Water consumption increases during the night hours as men seek to replace the fluids lost during the punishing heat of the day. The quartermaster monitors these distributions carefully, for the ship's water supply represents the thin line between life and death for every man aboard. In the tropical heat, a man can survive only a few days without water, making the careful rationing of this precious resource one of the most critical aspects of ship management. The night hours also provide opportunities for maintenance tasks that cannot be safely performed during the day. Rigging can be inspected and adjusted by touch when visual examination is impossible. Small repairs to sails and equipment can be accomplished by skilled hands working in near darkness. The ship's carpenter might use these quiet hours to work on projects that require concentration, crafting replacement parts, or improving the vessel's equipment with whatever materials are available. Weather patterns often change during the night, and the watch must remain alert to signs of approaching storms or shifts in wind direction. The Caribbean is famous for sudden squalls that can appear with little warning, bringing torrential rain and dangerous winds that can dismast a ship or drive it onto hidden reefs. The night watch must be prepared to rouse the entire crew at a moment's notice if weather threatens the vessel's safety. The psychological effects of the night watch are as significant as the physical challenges. Men who spend hours staring into the darkness often report seeing things that are not there. Phantom sails on the horizon, or mysterious lights that vanish when examined more closely. The isolation and monotony can play tricks on the mind, creating visions and sounds that seem real, but exist only in the imagination of tired, stressed sailors. These mental challenges are compounded by the superstitious nature of most sailors of this era. The night sea is populated, in their minds, with ghosts of drowned men, supernatural ships that appear and disappear without explanation, and sea monsters that rise from the depths to drag unwary vessels to destruction. While educated men might dismiss such beliefs as ignorant folklore, the psychological power of these superstitions is very real for men who must face the unknown dangers of the ocean darkness. The night watch also provides time for reflection and conversation that the busy activity of daylight hours rarely allows. Men speak in hushed tones about their past lives, their hopes for the future, and their fears about the dangerous path they have chosen. These quiet conversations often reveal the humanity behind the fearsome reputation of pirates, showing them to be men driven by circumstance rather than inherent evil, seeking freedom and opportunity in a world that offered them little of either. Stories are shared during these dark hours, tales of previous adventures, narrow escapes, and legendary figures from the golden age of piracy. These narratives serve multiple purposes, providing entertainment during the long watches while also transmitting practical knowledge and cultural values. Young sailors learn not only the techniques of their trade, but also the unwritten codes of behavior that govern their dangerous profession. The changing of the night watch marks significant points in the ship's routine, dividing the darkness into manageable segments. The middle watch, from midnight to 4 in the morning, is often considered the most challenging, as this is when human alertness naturally reaches its lowest point. Men who draw this duty must fight against their body's natural inclination to sleep, forcing themselves to remain vigilant when every instinct tells them to rest. As the night progresses toward dawn, subtle changes in the atmosphere signal the approaching end of the dark hours. The air may become cooler or more humid, indicating weather changes that will affect the coming day. The behavior of seabirds and marine life often shifts in the hours before sunrise, providing experienced sailors with clues about what the new day might bring. The stars themselves tell the story of passing time, wheeling slowly across the sky in their eternal dance. Men who have spent years at sea learn to read these celestial timepieces with remarkable accuracy, able to determine the hour within minutes simply by observing the positions of familiar constellations. This knowledge becomes second nature to experienced sailors, as automatic and reliable as breathing. The night watch must also maintain the ship's heading and speed, making constant small adjustments to the sails and rudder to keep the vessel on course. This requires a delicate touch and years of experience, as the feedback provided by the ship's motion through the water is much more subtle in darkness. The helmsman must rely on the feel of the wheel in his hands, the sound of water flowing past the hull, and the set of the sails against the night sky to gauge the ship's performance. As the long night hours finally begin to give way to the first hints of dawn, the night watch prepares for the ritual of handing over responsibility to their relief. Equipment must be checked and secured, the ship's position estimated and recorded, and any significant events of the night reported to the incoming watch. This transition marks not just a change of personnel, but the beginning of another cycle in the endless rhythm of life aboard a pirate ship. The approaching dawn brings with it new possibilities and new dangers. The coming daylight will reveal what the darkness has hidden, perhaps showing a potential prize on the horizon, or exposing the ship to enemies who have been searching for it through the night. For the pirates who have chosen this life of constant uncertainty, each new day represents another chance to seize their fortune or meet their fate on the endless expanse of the Caribbean Sea. As the first pale light of dawn begins to creep across the eastern horizon, the night watch prepares for one of the most critical moments of their duty. This transition from darkness to light, while offering relief from the long hours of vigilance, also presents the greatest danger for any pirate vessel. Dawn is when naval patrols prefer to strike, using the cover of night to position themselves for a surprise attack as visibility returns. It is when merchant ships, having sailed through the darkness with all possible speed, might suddenly appear within striking distance. The changing light creates optical illusions that can transform distant clouds into enemy sails or make real threats vanish into tricks of shadow and reflection. The lookouts in the crow's nest strain their eyes against the growing light, searching for any irregularity on the horizon that might indicate another vessel's presence. Their night vision, carefully preserved through hours of darkness, begins to fade as the sky brightens, requiring them to readjust their perception to the changing conditions. Every man on deck understands that these moments of transition are when their fate might be decided, when fortune or disaster could appear with the rising sun. Below deck, the off-duty crew begins to stir as the familiar sounds of the changing watch penetrate their exhausted sleep. Hammocks creak and sway as men struggle to consciousness, their bodies stiff from the cramped sleeping quarters and the constant motion of the ship. The air in these lower compartments has grown thick and stale during the night hours, heavy with the accumulated breath and body heat of dozens of sleeping men. The first task of the awakening crew is to make their way to the upper deck, seeking the fresh air and growing light that will restore their alertness for the day ahead. The morning ritual of personal hygiene, such as it exists aboard a pirate ship, takes place in these early hours. Men splash seawater on their faces and hands, the salt spray providing a shocking awakening that drives away the last vestiges of sleep. Those fortunate enough to possess razors attempt to shave by touch and instinct, using whatever small mirror or polished metal surface they might own. Most simply accept the gradual accumulation of facial hair as an inevitable part of their maritime existence. The ship's cook begins his preparations for the morning meal, working by the light of carefully shielded lanterns as he rekindles the galley fire. The process of coaxing flames from the banked coals requires skill and patience, for a careless moment could either extinguish the fire entirely or create a dangerous flare that might ignite the wooden structure around it. Once the fire is established, he begins the familiar routine of preparing the crew's simple fare, the same hardtack and salted meat that has sustained them through countless similar mornings. As full daylight spreads across the water, the true character of the new day begins to reveal itself. The wind that seemed steady and reliable during the dark hours might shift direction or strength with the warming of the air. Cloud formations that were invisible in the darkness now appear on the horizon, potentially bringing weather changes that could affect the ship's course and speed. The sea itself takes on different characteristics as the light reveals wave patterns and currents that were hidden during the night. The daily inspection routine begins anew, but now with the advantage of full visibility. Every rope, sail, and fitting that was checked by touch in the darkness can now be examined thoroughly for signs of wear or damage. The night hours, while generally calmer than the active day periods, still subject the ship to constant stress from wind and wave action. Rigging lines stretch and contract with changes in humidity and temperature. Canvas sails develop small tears from the constant flapping against the breeze. Metal fittings show signs of corrosion from the salt air that permeates every aspect of the maritime environment. The captain emerges from his cabin to assess the ship's condition and position after the long night. His trained eye sweeps across the vessel, noting the set of the sails, the behavior of the crew, and any changes in the ship's surroundings since he last observed them. The quartermaster approaches with his report of the night's events, detailing any significant occurrences, changes in weather or course, and the general condition of the crew under his watch. Navigation becomes a morning priority as the captain and sailing master work together to determine their exact position after the night's travel. The process requires careful observation of the sun's position as it climbs toward its noon zenith, combined with calculations based on their estimated speed and direction during the dark hours. Dead reckoning, the primary method of navigation available to these men, accumulates small errors over time, making regular position checks essential for accurate seamanship. The morning light also reveals the condition of the sea around them, providing clues about weather patterns and potential opportunities. The color of the water can indicate depth and the presence of currents. The behavior of seabirds suggests the proximity of land or the presence of schools of fish that might attract other vessels. Cloud formations on the horizon hint at wind patterns that could affect their sailing performance in the hours ahead. As the crew settles into the rhythm of another day, conversations turn to the eternal concerns that occupy the minds of men living this precarious existence. The state of their supplies, always a critical consideration, becomes a topic of daily discussion. Water barrels are checked and their contents estimated, for running short of drinking water in the tropical heat could prove fatal within days. Food stores are inventoried and rationed accordingly, with the quartermaster calculating how long their current provisions might sustain the crew. The possibility of encountering other vessels dominates much of their speculation and planning. Every pirate crew maintains a constant awareness of the shipping patterns in their area of operation, knowing which routes are most likely to yield profitable targets and which might bring them into contact with naval patrols or well-armed merchant vessels prepared to fight rather than surrender their cargo. The morning hours also provide opportunities for the crew to engage in various forms of training and preparation that the darkness made impossible. Weapon maintenance becomes a priority, with men cleaning and checking their personal arms as well as the ship's artillery. Pistols must be disassembled and cleaned to prevent the corrosive effects of salt air from jamming their mechanisms. Swords require sharpening and oiling to maintain their effectiveness in combat. The ship's cannons undergo their daily inspection and cleaning ritual, ensuring that these critical weapons remain ready for immediate use. The complexity of managing a cannon battery becomes apparent during these morning preparations. Each gun requires a precisely coordinated team of men to operate effectively. From the powder monkey who brings charges from the magazine to the gun captain who aims and fires the weapon. The process of loading, aiming, and firing a cannon is both dangerous and technically demanding, requiring split-second timing and absolute coordination among the crew members involved. Ammunition preparation occupies much of the morning routine for the gun crews. Iron cannonballs must be inspected for flaws that could cause them to shatter when fired, potentially damaging the cannon itself. Different types of specialized ammunition serve specific tactical purposes, from solid shot designed to hole enemy hulls to chain shot intended to destroy rigging and sails. Grape shot, consisting of small iron balls packed in canvas bags, transforms the cannon into a massive shotgun, capable of sweeping enemy decks clear of personnel. The ship's small arms also require constant attention and maintenance. Each crew member typically carries a pistol and some form of edged weapon, usually a cutlass or boarding axe designed for close-quarters combat. These personal weapons must be kept clean, sharp, and ready for immediate use, as a pirate's life might depend on drawing and firing his pistol in a matter of seconds during a boarding action. The morning inspection extends to every aspect of the ship's equipment and structure. The rigging receives particular attention, as the complex network of ropes and cables that control the sails represents the vessel's primary means of propulsion and maneuverability. Each line is examined for signs of fraying or weakness that could lead to catastrophic failure during critical moments. The sails themselves are scrutinized for tears or weak spots that might spread under the stress of strong winds. The ship's hull also undergoes daily examination, both above and below the waterline. The constant working of the vessel in heavy seas can open seams between planks, allowing seawater to enter the bilge. The pumping of this accumulated water becomes a regular chore that must be performed several times each day to prevent the ship from becoming waterlogged and losing its buoyancy. As the morning progresses and the sun climbs higher in the tropical sky, the heat begins to build toward the punishing intensity that characterizes Caribbean sailing. The crew adjust their clothing and behavior accordingly, seeking whatever shade the ship's structure provides while continuing their essential duties. Work schedules are modified to take advantage of the cooler morning hours for the most strenuous tasks, leaving routine maintenance and watch standing for the hotter periods of the day. The psychological atmosphere aboard the ship also shifts with the coming of full daylight. The mysterious, almost supernatural quality of the night hours gives way to the practical concerns of another day at sea. Men who might have been troubled by superstitious fears during the dark hours now focus on the immediate realities of their situation. The endless expanse of blue water that surrounds them, while still impressive in its immensity, becomes familiar territory rather than an unknown realm filled with imagined dangers. The social dynamics of the crew become more apparent as the men gather on deck for their morning meal and the day's work assignments. The democratic principles that govern major decisions exist alongside practical hierarchies based on skill and experience. Veteran sailors naturally assume leadership roles in technical matters, while newer crew members learn through observation and gradual participation in the ship's complex operations. The morning meal, while elaborate by hardly any standard, provides an important social the crew together as ritual that brings a community. Men gather in small groups on deck, sharing their simple fare and engaging in the conversations that maintain morale and crew cohesion. These informal gatherings serve multiple purposes beyond mere sustenance, allowing information to flow throughout the ship and providing opportunities for the resolution of minor conflicts before they can escalate into serious problems. The quartermaster uses the morning assembly to make announcements regarding the day's activities, changes in course or destination, and any disciplinary matters that require attention. His role as the crew's advocate and representative requires him to balance the need for order and efficiency with the democratic principles that form the foundation of their society. This delicate balance must be maintained through constant attention to the crew's morale and concerns. As the morning routine continues, the ship begins to take on the character that will define another day in their ongoing voyage. The wind patterns establish themselves, determining the vessel's speed and course options. The weather conditions become apparent, influencing decisions about sail configuration and routing. The crew settles into the familiar rhythms of shipboard life, each man taking up his assigned duties with the practiced efficiency that comes from months or years of shared experience. The lookouts maintain their vigilant watch from the crow's nest, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of other vessels or changes in weather conditions. Their elevated position provides them with a view that extends for miles in every direction, making them the ship's primary early warning system for both opportunities and threats. The quality of their observation and reporting can mean the difference between a successful capture and a dangerous encounter with superior forces. The morning hours also provide opportunities for the ship's officers to plan their strategy for the coming day. Charts are consulted to determine the most promising areas for encountering merchant traffic. Weather patterns are analysed to predict wind conditions that might affect their ability to pursue or escape from other vessels. Intelligence gathered from previous captures or contacts with other pirates is evaluated to identify potential targets or threats in their area of operation. The endless cycle of life aboard a pirate ship continues as another day begins, driven by the same forces of survival, opportunity, and human ambition that have shaped their existence since they first chose this dangerous path. The morning light reveals not just the physical reality of their situation, but also the complex web of relationships, responsibilities, and shared risks that bind these men together in their floating community beyond the reach of any earthly law. And so, our long journey through the wooden world of the 17th-century pirate ship draws to a close. We have walked these creaking decks from dawn to dusk, from the democratic assemblies where desperate men forged their own laws to the lonely night watches where they faced the endless darkness of the open sea. We have witnessed a society born from oppression, yet governed by principles of fairness that surpassed those of the legitimate world they had abandoned. These were not the romantic heroes of legend, but complex men who chose a brutal freedom over comfortable servitude. They created floating republics in an age of absolute monarchy, established insurance systems for the wounded when kings offered none for their subjects, and shared their plunder equally when merchants and naval officers grew rich on the backs of common sailors. Their world was one of constant danger, meager food, and primitive conditions, yet it was also a realm where every man's voice carried equal weight, and where brotherhood meant survival. The pirate ship was more than a vessel. It was a home, a workplace, a fortress, and a symbol of defiance against a world that offered little hope to ordinary men. Within its wooden walls, outcasts and rebels found purpose, community, and the possibility of fortune that the legitimate world denied them. As we return to our own time, we carry with us the memory of these remarkable floating communities and the men who dared to live beyond the reach of any king's law. Their legacy endures not in buried treasure or romantic tales, but in the courage they showed in creating something new from the wreckage of their old lives. Thank you for sailing with me into the forgotten world of the golden age of piracy. Until our next journey into the shadows of history, I wish you calm seas and a peaceful night.